Our next honored guest is Louise von Dardel. She is the niece of Raoul Wallenberg, who needs no introduction from us.
Shalom.
Hello.
I lost my speech. So I have to speak from my heart, and I want to speak to your heart about my uncle. I've never met him, but I'm very proud of him. And I get prouder and prouder every time I speak of him.
That's it.
So he was said to have saved 100,000 Jews of the Budapest, and that was 59 years ago. Since then, my family did everything to bring him home. Since then, they went from hoping to despairing and then to bitterness. When my grandparents died in 1978, they felt very bitter and very lonely. They didn't know then that my uncle would be a hero, that he would be so well known over the world. They would be so happy to know that, I'm sure. And I also think, and often when I speak about my uncle, I feel his spirit, I feel him here, and I think he would be very proud to see what the Jewish people have done of Israel. And because he was in Palestine in 1936, and he saw then a stony land with very little water. The Zionists told him then that they wanted to have 4 million people living here. He thought that was a stupid and crazy, impossible idea. I know you have now more than 6 million. And myself, I'm very impressed after having visited Israel a few days with the American Jewish Committee. And I'm thankful for having us as guests. Now I want to tell you about my uncle from the start, because his life was very special from the beginning. He was born as an orphan, as his father had died just a few months before his birth. So he received the name of his father, Raoul. His father came from a very powerful financial banking family called Wallenberg, that were the most powerful of Scandinavia. And so he lived alone with his mother for a few years until my grandmother met my grandfather, who is of a family of an artist and of artists and diplomats. So in this very special constellation of businessmen and artists, Raoul was brought up, and I think this is one of the reasons that he became such a special, creative, and entrepreneurial man. So what was also special was that my grandmother had a very strong personality. I think, in fact, she was like a Jewish mother. And so when my uncle was 18, he left as far as he could. He went to America to study architecture and stayed there for 4 years. And then, instead of going back home, because my grandmother was longing so much to see him again, he went to South Africa to work as a trainee, because his grandfather, it's really a bit hard to talk to everybody. When his grandfather wanted him to become a businessman, to follow the tradition of the family. So he took him as a trainee to some friends in companies in South Africa, and then to a bank in Palestine. And then Raoul wrote back home saying that banking is really not my cup of tea, because banking is about saying no to people. I want to say yes to people, no to positive action. But this is what he did. But then he didn't yet know. Then he came back to Sweden and worked there, and was in a neutral country, tranquil in a high society. His future was wonderful. But then it was a war, and he really knew about Jewish people, having been in Palestine. And one day, the Americans decided to put up the War Refugee Board and asked a man in America to go to Europe looking for a volunteer to go to Budapest. They didn't find any volunteer. They went from country to country and came to Sweden, and there my uncle immediately stood up. He said, I can't be a bystander anymore, especially as he knew that Eichmann was putting his plan into execution to eliminate all the Jews of Hungary within a very short time. So we are now in the end of the war. You have the Allies coming from one side, from the eastern, and one side of Russians coming from the west. And here in between you have Budapest. There were about 250 Jews left. Already half of them had been massacred within 6 months. And then you could see Raoul, who was both a businessman and an architect, who received a diplomatic passport to do what he had to do. He came to the embassy, and I read in letters that he didn't look at all like a diplomat, because he came with his rucksack and a pistol and a sleeping bag,
Not very diplomatic.
and came with colorful pencils and decided to make a passport. So he first looked what had been done by the Swedish embassy and by his colleagues, the Swiss colleagues, and took his pencil and painted a yellow and blue passport, put a lot of stamps, photos, and signatures, and this passport had a high validity in Hungary. He then also, I left the time short. What he also did was that he went out to the streets. He went with his car, with his chauffeur, and you will see pictures that his driver could make under his coat when he was negotiating with the soldiers, with the Nazis, when he was distributing the passports by saying, who is Swedish here? And of course there were no Swedes, but those who were thinking quickly raised their hands and they got a Swedish passport on the spot. So he distributed 30,000 passports in this way. And he also looked after the people so that they could make a living by giving them houses, and he had 25,000 people that could live in protected houses that were of the Swedish embassy. And he also had, through his name, and because of the fear of the Nazis, because of the end of the war, they saved also, together with the Swiss, the ghetto by telling the general that if he blow up the ghetto, he will be hanging somewhere on a tree after the war. So this is what he did, but in fact he didn't do it alone. He employed 400 Jews who worked for him. He didn't do it alone because he also worked together with his like-singers from other embassies, like the Swiss embassy. And I think he not only saved people, but one very important thing he did was to give the hope back, the hope to humanity, the hope that one man can make a difference. And I think his example gave a lot of courage to the Jews who then felt so apathic, finding no possibility to stand up, and now they knew it was possible, so they could find their dignity back. So this was the important thing. Now, what I also want to talk about is what happened after I and on behalf of my family, we still want him back home. If he's alive, he's a hostage in Russia, and if he's not alive, I think he really deserves to lay in peace and to have his grave and not become emotional. And I think for the world it's important not to accept that a hero just disappeared, that a hero that rescued people should be rescued. And I ask you for your, that if those who want to join me in this, please do, because I think we should lobby Russia and our governments. It's a question of, for us, humanity, to find our progress back, our honor. And it's an honor for all countries who can, if we can make him return. And my dream would be that at his grave, people like him would come and exchange ideas to make our world a better world. Thank you.